Hi, and welcome to the first event in the Robotic Vision MOOC. This is the second in series of 2 MOOCs that I've done so far. For those of you who are new to the series, welcome. I hope you really enjoy this course, have some fun, and learn some of the fundamentals, some of the first steps in this field of robotic vision. I should probably clarify what it is I mean by robotic vision. There certainly is a term called computer vision, which is a very well-known discipline. There are lots of people who consider themselves to be researchers in computer vision. It's perhaps mostly considered to be a subset of the field of computer science. Computer vision people have got their conferences, regular conferences that they go to, and they have a whole bunch of journals that they publish into. Interestingly, the robotics researchers are a disjoint community. They're a bunch of people and they have their own conferences and their own journals that they publish in. And really, there aren't too many people who look at the problem of applying computer vision techniques to the problem of controlling or guiding robots. And this, to me, is a really critical lack that we have in the field of robotics and computer vision. I think we'd gain a lot if we could join these two different communities back together and use some of the fantastic research results that are coming out of the computer vision field and apply them to the guidance and control of robots. Computer vision people have come up with some wonderful techniques in recent times. The problem of face recognition by computer was once very, very hard. It's, for all intents and purposes, quite well solved now, and that's by fantastic research happening in the computer vision community. More recently, they've been focusing on the general object recognition problem. So you show a computer vision system a picture, and it says, okay, this is a cat, that's a dog, that's a coffee cup, that's a tree, or whatever. And this is really powerful capability. It's a sort of capability that we have, but it's only in the last few years, I think, that we've made progress in actually being able to do this pretty well in a computer vision system. That's exactly the sort of capability that robots need. Robots need to be able to take pictures of the world around them and then to be able to recognize what are the objects in the scene, to be able to know what those objects are, where those objects are within the scene, so that they can do something like plan a manipulation task to pick the object up with a robot arm, or if it's a mobile robot, to be able to navigate safely through the world. Now, the advantage of knowing what an object is in a scene, so in the room behind me, you can see like a filing cabinet. If I had a computer vision system that told me that that thing is a filing cabinet, I knew where it was, then that's an advantage now, because I know something about filing cabinets. I know that they're pretty heavy. I know that they don't move by themselves. I also know that they don't move even if I push it pretty hard. But say an object like a coffee cup, if I recognize that sitting on my desk, then if I had knowledge about coffee cups, then I could say, well, that's a coffee cup, it holds coffee. If Peter wanted coffee, then maybe that's what I should go and grab and fill up with coffee. So by attaching a label, a semantically meaningful label to objects in the world, we can then start to reason about those objects just as we do, and that's going to be totally beneficial to robots. So to me, that's what robotic vision is about, is how do we take the wonderful things that computer vision people have been doing and apply them to the problem of robotics. So I use the term robotic vision to mean that. Now, in this course, it's a relatively short course. It's only 11 lectures, and we can't possibly begin to cover everything that's happened in computer vision. Computer vision is an old field. It probably goes back, some of the earliest results you can probably trace back to the 1960s. So what we're going to do in this course is perhaps what you might call classical computer vision, very classical techniques that were developed 60s, 70s, and 80s that are quite easy to understand, and they're also quite powerful for a large class of problems. So in this course, we're not going to create a deep learning system that can recognize the difference between a cat and a dog. That's not what this course is about. We're going to look at classical vision techniques. We're going to implement them in MATLAB. We're going to get some results, get images from real cameras, process them, and be able to do some very simple classification of objects in scenes. So instead of cats and dogs, we're going to be able to say, this is a green circle, that's a blue square, that's a red circle, and where that object is and how big that object is within the scene. So just to kind of set some parameters for the course, that's what this is about. So as I said earlier, for those of you who are new to this series of MOOCs, welcome, and I hope you have a great time and learn some things that you will find useful and interesting. For those of you who are returning, who've already done the Introduction to Robotics MOOC, welcome back. It's good to be with you again. If you've been in any of the earlier events, you will notice that my office has changed. The floor of the building where my office used to be is being refurbished. So we've been thrown out of there into some temporary accommodation in a rather old building at the university. So this is my temporary office, and what you can't see in the camera view is a large stack of cardboard boxes that I haven't yet unpacked. So we're going to try and do a few events like this through the Robotic Vision course, just as we did in the Introduction to Robotics course. So that's perhaps all I wanted to say by way of introduction. We have a number of questions been submitted by some by the tutor team and some also by participants in the course. So the first sort of questions that I want to address are from Maxime Leclerc, and so thank you very much for sending in some questions. Actually, it's three-part question. So the first one was, he was wondering whether myself or a team here are interested in robotic learning or machine learning in general. Do I think that learning will be important to solve robotic problems in the future? And the question of that is yes, to all aspects of the question. Machine learning, I think, is probably one of the most important, and at the moment, one of the most powerful techniques we've come up with to solve this general problem of trying to understand very complex world. Technique called deep learning, deep neural networks, which are neural networks with many layers, and layers have got different types or different architectures, and in combination they are able to do phenomenal jobs: object recognition, face recognition, and so on. So probably 2 years ago, there was probably nobody in the group here at my university who were working in the machine learning space. Today, I think probably half the people in the group, many of the PhD students are using deep learning techniques to progress their research. So it is a technique that, as I said, has come very quickly and has shown such massive improvements in performance over techniques that were around before that I think we're going to be learning a lot more and seeing much more about deep learning systems involved in vision-enabled robots that we build. So absolutely, it will be very important into the future. The second question was, he saw that I considered doing a third course on mobile robotics, and was I still reflecting on the idea? Absolutely, I'm still reflecting on the idea of doing a third MOOC and even a fourth MOOC. For me, the second half of this year, I'm taking some sabbatical leave. I'm going to go to Oxford University, hang out there with the mobile robotics group, and I'm going to work on the second edition of my textbook. The first edition of the textbook was written pretty much in 2009 and 2010. So, by now it's a 5-year-old book, and 5 years is typically the point at which people consider doing a second edition. So the second edition of the book is going to fix a number of the errors which are in the book, unfortunately. You can find a list of these errors in the errata page on my personal website. So go to petercork.com/RBC, and there you'll see a section called errata, and it lists all the errors that I know about in the book. So the first thing I'm going to do is to fix those errors. There are a few things in the book that I think I could have explained much better than I did in the book. That's basically things that I learned while I was teaching here at the university and teaching in the MOOCs. When I wrote the book, I was working as a research scientist in a government lab. I was not an academic, I wasn't a teacher. So I've learned a lot, I think, about better ways to explain some concepts since I've become an academic. So I want to fix the way I explain some things. I probably want to increase the level of detail in the mobile robotics part of the book. And there are also a few algorithms which I think are really important to roboticists today that weren't covered in the book. So that's things like bundle adjustment, post-graph relaxation, scan matching, are three that are pretty high on my list of things to elaborate on within the book. The challenge for me is that the book is already very thick and it's already very heavy, and I can't think of anything that I want to take out of the book. So I'm going to add some more pages, I don't know how many more pages, to cover this extra material and to perhaps improve the way I explain things. So for me, kind of long-winded answer, the second half of this year is to do a revision of the book. While I'm doing that, I think I will also start to think about MOOCs number 3 and 4. So MOOC number 3 will definitely be about mobile robots, about the kinematics and dynamics of mobile robot platforms. It will be about the problem of path planning. How do I navigate a robot through an environment that I have a map for? And then it will be about localization. How does the robot work out where it is? And then map building. How does a robot build a map that it can use for navigation? That's MOOC number 3. And best chance is that I would start developing that MOOC in early 2016, and maybe it would roll out later in 2016. The fourth MOOC is going to be about multi-view geometry. So there's a chapter on multi-view geometry in my book. There are whole entire textbooks devoted to the topic of multi-view geometry. A very well-known book by Richard Hartley and Andrew Zisserman on multi-view geometries. If you like, it's the Bible for multi-view geometry. I couldn't hope in a MOOC to do justice to that entire book, but there are really many very important concepts in multi-view geometry that I think it would be important to cover. So it would be things like stereo vision and visual odometry, the two things that I think would be really good to cover. So that's what I'd like to do, and we'll see how things pan out in 2016. Third question from Maxime is, do I expect to have as many students in the robotic vision class as we did in the Introduction to Robotics class? It's a good question. I have to say I was completely overwhelmed, surprised, in a delightful way, that we had 15.2 thousand students in the Introduction to Robotics course. I had no idea we would have that many students. I thought we'd have a few thousand students. Robotic Vision course has got at the moment something over 7,000 students. I'm more than happy with that. I suspect that robotic vision perhaps sounds a little bit more technical, and perhaps not as welcoming or as inviting as a title such as Introduction to Robotics. So I know from Introduction to Robotics we had enrollments from a large number of quite young people, people in their teens, high school students, and I'm not sure how well they fared. I suspect that the course would have been too hard for them. They don't have the necessary mathematical prerequisites. In some ways, the robotic vision course is less mathematical. It might actually be more suitable to younger viewers and younger students. But at the moment, I'm more than happy with the number of students that we have in robotic vision. The last question from Maxime is, did our team consider edX.org? So edX.org and Coursera are probably two of the most well-known MOOC providers on the planet. And another one out of the UK called FutureLearn. So there are a number of companies starting up now, and they attract content from people like myself, and they effectively publish it to the students. At our university, we went with the product from a company called Edcast, and the software is OpenEdX. So it's actually the same software in our MOOC platform as it is on edX.org. But for us, there are a number of advantages working with a small, nimble startup company in our first MOOC adventures here at QUT. So we're more than happy with Edcast, and the user experience, the look and feel, is going to be very, very similar between these MOOCs and the MOOCs that you'd find on edX.org. The only difference would probably be around the discussion forum, which I think is a really important feature of any MOOC platform. It's a way that students can ask questions, other students can either share the questions, perhaps respond with answers to the questions, and our tutor team and myself can look through the discussion forums, see what's going on, how people's understanding is, and inject responses or comments as appropriate. So I think it's really important, if you're going to participate in this MOOC and you didn't participate in the previous one, that you familiarize yourself with how the discussion forum works. In the Getting Started week, there's perhaps not too much scope for creating comments. But once we get started with the content as it comes up, week 1, week 2, and so on, you're able to have a discussion attached to each particular topic. So in week 1 now, you can see the topic bar across the top of the screen. There are each of those little short segments. We can have a discussion on each one of those little segments. So you can ask questions and people can respond. So that's probably, they're my answers to all of Maxine's questions. If you've got a question that you'd like me to answer, then please post it to the discussion attached to this event, and I can try to answer it. Okay, questions now that have come from the TA team, and I think these have been synthesized from some of the comments that they've seen in the discussion forum. So the first one is about the optional project for the Robotic Vision MOOC. And will it cost as much to participate in this optional project? In the Introduction to Robotics MOOC, there was the opportunity to build a robot arm, a simple robot arm with 2 joints. And a number of students completed this project, and we're just finishing right now the peer review. So the students posted videos of their robot working, and we looked at these and we evaluated, and there's some wonderful work there. So that was very, very gratifying to see. There was some cost involved in that. The preferred platform, the recommended platform that we suggested was to use Lego, either NXT technology or EV3. And I know those kits are expensive. They're a few $100s each. There was a group of people who were working on using lower cost technology, using Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, and RC servos. And some of those we've also seen in the peer review section. So for those, the cost was, was probably less than $100, but for some students, I understand that that's still quite a substantial amount of money. So for this MOOC, the project involves really nothing more than printing out a worksheet. So we provide the PDF sheet, you print it out, and you could actually use that image that we provide you, but we'd actually prefer that you took a picture of that paper worksheet, and you can do that with your mobile phone. Take a picture with your mobile phone and upload it to the computer, where you can start to process it in MATLAB. Maybe your computer has got a built-in camera, so you could use that camera to grab a picture of the worksheet, or you could plug in some sort of USB webcam into your computer. So I'm hoping that the entry cost for this project is going to be a whole lot less. Now, if you did the first MOOC, and if you did the optional project and you built the robot arm, then the way it works is you sit your robot arm on the worksheet that we provided you. So you sit your robot on the worksheet. On the worksheet are printed a number of colored shapes. And the task in this particular project is we want your robot to go and touch a particular sequence of shapes. And we'll give you that the sequence of shapes later on. But we'll say the task is for your robot to go to the green triangle, the red circle, and the blue square. And it's your job to process the image from the camera, and the camera could be anywhere in the world. So we're not necessarily taking a picture of the sheet from directly above. It could be an oblique view. You take that picture, you process it, you find the coordinates of these shapes in the image, convert them to millimeters, and then have your robot reach to the millimeter coordinate of those objects on the worksheet. So that's the way you can tie the result of the first project with the results of the second project and actually build a robot that can take visual information and turn that into robot action. That's what the second project is all about. Another question that's come in from the tutor team is, why did the Toolbox become a MATLAB thing and not an Octave thing? So some of you may know of Octave. It's an open source project, and it's very much like MATLAB in many respects. It's an interactive mathematical environment that deals with scalars and matrices and vectors. And the syntax for Octave commands these days is very, very much the same as MATLAB syntax. So a lot of simple MATLAB stuff you can do in Octave, and you'll get, of course, exactly the same results. Where it gets a little bit incompatible is when it comes to the graphics subsystem. So the commands for doing graphics in Octave are different to the commands for doing graphics in MATLAB. And in MATLAB, these days in my toolboxes, I make a great use of classes. So we create objects of particular types, objects to represent cameras, objects to represent robots, objects to represent quaternions. And Octave now has a very, very incompatible syntax for expressing classes than MATLAB does. So at one point, the toolboxes were supported under MATLAB and Octave. There is a subset of the toolbox, which is of the robotics toolbox rather, which is compatible with Octave. There's a folder called Octave in the toolbox distribution, but it's not complete, and I haven't been keeping it up to date. So you're welcome to have a look at it and have a play. If anybody's got a lot of energy and wants to convert more of the toolbox to Octave, please contact me. I'd be happy to perhaps share some advice with you, provide some guidance, but I don't have the cycles at the moment to put into an activity like that. There's also been some interest in converting Toolbox to Python. I love the Python language. It's wonderfully expressive, and I really like programming in Python. And again, there's a subset of the Toolbox. It was ported to Python quite a long time ago. It was done by, not all of it was done by me. There were some people in the Toolbox community who chose to do that. If anybody wants to do more work in Python Toolbox, contact me and we can have a chat. And again, I can provide some guidance, but I don't have the cycles to put into that either. So that's why it's become a MATLAB thing and not an Octave or a Python thing. Next question from the TAs was just to talk about some of the things that are happening here in my lab here at QUT. So what I'm going to do is to do a screen share. I'm just going to run a little bit of a presentation past you that I gave recently. So let me share screen 2. And hopefully you can see this and play this presentation. So a big project here at QUT. The project's been going on for a long time now and driven primarily by some colleagues, is in agriculture. And so this is a prototype of our weed spraying robot. So the platform is an off-the-shelf utility vehicle made by John Deere. The vehicle is called a Gator. And it has a fairly sophisticated vision-based navigation system. So it's not relying on GPS to navigate through the field. It's using knowledge from inertial sensors, and it's using information that's flowing from a stereo camera pair on the front of the vehicle. Vehicle works day and night. We have a very bright array of white LEDs that cast enough light for this vehicle to be able to work at night. So it's able to do very, very accurate road following. The reason that we're not relying on GPS is that GPS is actually not a totally reliable sensor, would probably be the best way to put it. So in this particular environment, even though it's open fields and there are no trees or other obstacles, there are times, many minutes per day, when we just don't get a decent solution out of GPS. So high precision GPS receivers are very expensive, and they're not available 24/7. So for that reason, what we've done is to build a very, very low cost navigation system that is at least as accurate as real-time kinematic GPS. It's certainly sufficient for doing this job of following the rows. The reason low cost was important to us is we want to create small modular robots for doing farm work. At the moment, jobs like spraying weeds is done by massive robots that cost a lot of money, $500,000 to $1 million to build a very big, fast spraying robot, spraying machine rather, which is driven by the farmer. If we could automate a big machine like that, but we actually think there's a lot more sense in trying to automate small machines, and we put a number of those into the field and they work cooperatively. Small machines are much cheaper to build than big machines. And even though we need to have multiple small machines, you do the maths, it's actually cheaper to have a large number of small machines with low-cost navigation systems than one great big spraying machine which needs to be driven by a human being. Another really important aspect of this project is obstacle avoidance. So here we see Dave Ball, who's the lead engineer on this project, and standing in the field very confidently, and the robot's coming up to him and avoiding him. And the way it does that is based on the work of one of the PhD students in this, and it's based on what we call visual novelty. So the robot's driving through the field, it gets a sense of what it expects to see, and it's expecting to see this crop stubble, the dried remnants of the last season's crop. And it can describe that using a number of visual features. And when it sees Dave standing there, it provides a set of anomalous visual features. It doesn't look visually like anything that it's seen in recent time. So it declares him an obstacle and drives around him. So this is a very general approach. If there's a parked vehicle in the field or that electricity pole there, anything that's not crop, the vehicle will do its best to avoid. So that's what we're doing in agriculture. So this is a prototype that's been running probably for the last couple of years. And in recent times, we've developed a new version of it based on everything we learned from that prototype operating in the field. We call this the AgBot Mark II. And this is a CAD rendering of the robot. It's a beautiful looking thing, but it does actually exist in the lab. And it's just beginning to do its first movements, and we'll be taking that out to the field shortly. So this is a wonderful piece of engineering and something that I'm very, very proud of. And perhaps in a future event, we might actually go down to the lab and look at AgBot Mark II and some of the other robots that are down there. Another project that I'm very excited about is environmental protection. So this is a starfish, and it's known as the crown of thorns starfish. And normally we think of starfish as kind of nice and benevolent creatures. This starfish eats coral, and there are infestations of this starfish, quite large infestations on the Great Barrier Reef. And when the starfish and all its brothers and sisters have been passed, the coral reef ends up looking something like this. It really turns it into an underwater desert. And although the starfish are the naturally occurring species, they're part of the coral reef ecosystem for all sorts of reasons, but primarily because of bad things that human beings have done to the environment, such as making the water warmer and increased nutrient in the rivers that run off from continental Australia. The balance between the starfish and the coral has been changed for the worse, and so the population of the starfish is out of control. So the people who manage the reef have started a program now where they go around and control the populations of the starfish. Is basically they go around and cull them, or kill them to be blunt, and that's being done with human divers with these injection needles, and they inject a toxin into the starfish. So we're doing now is some work on automated means of detecting these starfish, and we're in the business now of constructing a robot which will take this visual information and guide an injecting arm to each of the starfish that it encounters. So it would perform the population control measures, and it would also give us information about how many starfish are there and their spatial distribution. So this is an interesting and perhaps a little confronting, where we are creating robots to go around and kill life forms. We have ethics clearance to do this work, and that's important. And certainly in Australia, these starfish are not classed as animals. So what we're doing is permissible under all the ethical frameworks that exist in Australia. So by doing this, it's certainly not our intention to exterminate all of the starfish. We just want to reduce the population to a level that will allow the coral to thrive. And once the coral are thriving, then there's a whole ecosystem of fish and other species which grows up around them. So we're just trying to restore the balance a little. So these are sort of two projects that I'm really excited in at the moment. There are a bunch of other projects here, and I could talk for hours about them, but I won't. And okay, so I'm back. But perhaps in a future event, we might actually do it from the lab and walk around the lab and see what's there. Just looking at the questions that I have from the TAs. The question is, we've seen a lot of advances in neural networks, and I spoke a little bit about neural networks earlier on, and they've asked the question that computers now can classify objects and even caption images. There's been some really interesting work was shown last year where you show a computer vision system a picture, quite a complex picture, and it describes what's there. It will say that there's a person in the foreground. The example I could remember was they were holding a tennis racket and there were two other people in the background. So we can take an image and we can turn it into a caption. And that's great. So an image which has got millions of pixels in it, we can turn that into a string of concise text. That's still not quite enough for a robot to work with. So though it's an important part of the problem of creating an intelligent robot, it isn't still the complete solution. We would then still need to say, how do we understand that concise textual description of the scene and combine that with the goal that the robot has? The robot has a goal to achieve something. How do we combine those two things together to actually get the robot to perform a useful task? So a really useful step along the way, but not yet the entire way. Okay, let's see if I've got any more questions come in. All right, some questions, some live questions, which is wonderful. So one question from Joshua Alfredo Navo Chokron. Hope I've done an okay job in pronouncing your name. So question is, are we using either visual odometry or SLAM algorithm on the autonomous submarine that I showed in a previous lecture? Absolutely. The underwater vehicles use visual odometry, and that's the process where the camera is looking at the world from a moving viewpoint. The camera is attached to the robot. As the robot moves through the world, everything in the image appears to move. And we can use that motion information in the image to determine how far the vehicle has moved through the world. We call that visual odometry. And in an underwater environment, vision is perhaps one of the most effective ways to do odometry. In a mobile robot with wheels, we do odometry by counting how often the wheels rotate. In an underwater robot, we don't have wheels running along the sea floor, so therefore visual odometry is a really good solution. We have other systems we have created where we use SLAM algorithms, and also biologically inspired variations on SLAM algorithms. And a very well-known one from our lab by my colleague Michael Milford is a technique called RAT-SLAM. So this is a simultaneous localization and mapping algorithm motivated a bit by the neural structure of a rat. Rats are amazing creatures. They can do fantastic navigation. Okay, so in Joshua's question, he goes on to ask that if we are doing visual odometry, how do we overcome all sorts of effects that we observe underwater? And there are a lot of issues in doing visual odometry underwater, particularly if you're quite close to the surface. We see these bright lines running across the scene, and they're due to sunlight refracting through the waves. They cause these moving bright bars in the underwater environment. And they can confuse a visual odometry system because the visual odometry system is looking for motion, things that are moving within the scene. We expect that the scene is static and all the motion that we see is due to our own motion, but that's not the case. There are these bright bars due to wave refraction. There are fish which are moving independently, and there might also be soft corals or seagrass which are swaying in the current or the wave action. So there are all of these things moving in the scene. So the issue is, how do we robustly find the motion that is due to the robot and not to these other external factors? And that's it's a problem in robust estimation. And there's a lot of literature on this, and as it depends, as long as most of the motion, there's enough interesting texture in the scene and it's moving due to the robot's motion, we can use that to reject, if you like, motion due to these extraneous factors. Okay, the second question is perhaps a little bit technical, and I might leave that, but I'll move on to his third question, which is, when we work on projects, do we use a single camera or do we use two cameras? We've got different projects, and some projects we use a single camera, sometimes we use two cameras. The advantage of using two cameras is it's easy to determine how far things are away from our robot. If we use a single camera, it's not possible to know how far away something is. It could be a small thing close to me, it could be a large thing further away. But there are ways that we can combine other sensors with the information we get from a single camera to get the same sort of result as we would get from a stereo camera. So really it depends on the particular project. What does the robot need to do? What are the cost constraints? What are the energy constraints, size constraints, and so on. The next question is from Pia Francini O'Hagan. It asks, what would it take to join our team and study a PhD in robotics or artificial intelligence? I think if you wanted to come here and study for a PhD, first thing would be to write me an email. Tell me in a bit more detail about what it is that you want to study, and then we can take it from there. If the PhD could be with myself as a supervisor or with any of my very wonderful colleagues as supervisors, or maybe several of us as supervisors. Almost all the students here at QUT have more than one supervisor to guide them in their research program. And if you did come and study here, you get to work and hang out with a really great bunch of PhD students here who are working on all manner of visually guided robot systems. Next question from Jonathan Irving. Lots of questions coming. This is great. And Jonathan's question is regarding the robot arm. Are we going to do a compilation video of all the Are we going to do a compilation video of all the robots created? Yes, we are going to do that. What we need to do, though, is get permission from all the people who have posted videos of their robot arm. So we need to get their explicit written permission to use the video. And of course, in the compilation video, they would, of course, all be acknowledged for the great work that they've done. So that's something that we're working on, and we will release that shortly. Simon Gardner asks when processing live video into a robotic system, what resolutions do we use? And that's a really good question. Increasingly these days, cameras are getting to have greater and greater resolution. So once upon a time, when I was doing my PhD, cameras were 512 by 512 pixels. So that's 250,000 pixels in an image. These days, we have cameras with 1, 2, 5, 10 megapixels, and that's an awful lot of data. And generally, for a robotic system, we need to process the frames from the camera pretty quickly. We can't afford to wait a minute. We can't really afford to wait a second. We'd like to get an answer, ideally within a short fraction of a second. So the techniques that we use typically is the simplest and easiest thing, ugliest thing, is to reduce the resolution. So we subsample the image and reduce the number of pixels that are there until we get the number small enough that we can get the frame rate, the processing rate that we desire. So typically it's the processing rate is the hard constraint. It needs to be so many frames per second in order to do the robot control job, to drive the vehicle through the agricultural field, to guide the robot arm that's attached to the robot submarine. That's their hard constraint. And then we look at how many pixels we have in our image and the amount of computing power that we can throw at the problem. In some problems, you can afford to have a very large computer, perhaps a GPU cluster. In an underwater robot, we have relatively little volume in which we can put the computer. We also have an energy budget that an onboard GPU, it could consume more power than the motors do. And what that's going to do is to reduce the mission time of the robot. So as with all engineering, it's a matter of balancing out a whole bunch of constraints. And so typically the free variable here is the image resolution, and we reduce it so that we can you get away with using a smaller computer and get the processing rate that we want. So another part of Simon's question, it's kind of related, is the growth in high resolution camera technology, does it help or does it overload the system? The simple answer is that it overloads the system. There's some interesting work though has been done with what's called assorted array cameras or assorted pixel cameras, and you might be worth going to Google that. What the fundamental principle here is that I have an array of light sensing elements in my 10 megapixel camera. And when we make a color camera, we typically print some color filters on those. So some of the pixels are got a red filter, some have got a green filter, and some have got a blue filter. And that's how we make color images. That's pretty straightforward. It's called Bayer filtering. We've been doing that for a long time. Now people are saying, well, instead of just putting red, green, blue filters on there, perhaps we put red, green, blue filters, and then red, green, blue filters with a neutral density filter, so it blocks out some of the light. And then we put red, green, blue filters with an even stronger neutral density filter. So what this then means is that we get to see the red, green, and blue pixels, but also with different exposure settings. So instead of having to change the exposure setting of the camera, we can get effectively multiple exposures at exactly the same time. And that's really very, very important, because one of the biggest problems with using cameras outdoors is getting the exposure right. Typically an outdoor scene has got an area that's not very bright, an area that's very bright, and I want to see all of that. Typically with a camera today, I need to choose. Do I choose to set my exposure so I can see what's happening in the dark part of the scene, or do I set my exposure to see what's happening in the bright part? I want to see everything. So maybe these assorted pixel array cameras are the solution to that. We could also go a bit further, and we could put some filters on some of the pixels, could be polarization filters, so they could be horizontally and vertically polarized sensitive pixels as well. Mix them all up. I could get a wonderful high resolution color polarization image of a scene. I could move away from just having red, green, and blue channels. I could perhaps put 10 different color bands on there, and then I'd have a multispectral camera. So many things we could do, and what we're doing is really trading off the large number of pixels for more information about the scene in terms of wavelength, intensity, or perhaps polarization. Where am I on my list? Okay, from Simon H, who saw me on an SBS TV program the other night, where I was invited to be part of a panel discussion about robots for, it was actually quite a wide-ranging conversation about robots for education of people with autism, looking after elderly people, warfare, self-driving cars, jobs. That was the whole gamut. And on that, I mentioned that one of the projects we have here is related to capsicum picking. And asked, do I have any more information about capsicum picking? It's progressing. Capsicums or red peppers, green peppers, as they might be called in some parts of the world, are quite difficult things to pick. Human beings pick them. They grab the fruit and they twist and bend it so that the stalk snaps. They don't cut it off the bush. And the bush is kind of small, it's got a lot of leaves, and the capsicums hide behind the leaves. So there's all manner of challenges in this. First of all, we have to be able to see when the capsicums are partially or fully hidden behind leaves. We have to grab them firmly enough so that we can twist them off the bush, but not so firmly that we're going to damage them. So there's a manipulation and gripping problem. And then there's some quite complex robot motion to snap them off the bush. So it's going well. And again, perhaps if we do a future event, maybe we can go and have a look at prototype capsicum picking in action. And perhaps the last question that I might get to well, there's lots more questions coming. That's wonderful. I'm going to struggle to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Kithuswa Ramu. I'm sorry. He asked, what's the difference between the human eye and robot vision? So we need to disentangle a few things here. The human eye, if you like, is simply the sensory organ. It's this thing in the front of my head, and it's analogous to a human camera. Robotic vision comprises a camera and a computer to process the imagery to make a decision for a robot to action. So robot vision is the whole lot. It's from the camera through the processing through to the action. The human eye is just a camera, but it is connected through the optic nerve to my visual cortex, which is the back 1/3 of my brain, where all the interpretation of that visual information, understanding, and it goes on, and that's then connected to the motor parts of my brain, which connects then vision through to action. The human eye is effectively a camera. It's an RGB camera. It's quite differently constructed to the cameras that we create. It's got a very high dynamic range, much higher than the dynamic range of the cameras that you normally would buy. It's probably equivalent to a 120 megapixel camera, but the 120 megapixels are not very evenly spread. We have very high resolution in what we call our foveal view, that's looking straight forward, and in our peripheral vision, that's off to the sides, we have much less resolution. We create a high resolution image of our world by our eye unconsciously darting around the scene and building a composite, very high resolution image. So, quick answer to what's the difference between human eye and robot vision. Ben Petrie asks about my definition of robotic versus machine vision. It's an interesting and a good question, actually. I've been using the term robotic vision, and I tried to differentiate it from computer vision. To me, computer vision is the pure problem of taking an image, applying software algorithms to it, and making some sort of decision, cat, dog, or coffee cup, or emitting a caption. It's not connected to action in any kind of way. That, to me, is what's special about robotic vision. But there is a term called machine vision. And in fact, my toolbox is called the Machine Vision Toolbox. I think machine vision is a term that's probably going out of vogue. It was certainly a term that had a lot of currency in the 70s and 80s. And it was trying to distinguish between image processing and feature extraction. So let me elaborate on that. Image processing, a lot of image processing is about taking an image, perhaps an X-ray image that you've taken of a patient, and enhancing it in some way to produce another image in which some particular feature, perhaps a tumor, has been enhanced or highlighted. So image processing was about taking an image, processing it, and producing another image. The term machine vision came about because people wanted to describe a system where an image goes in, it's processed by a computer algorithm, and some very concise information comes out. And that might be, there is a defect in this part, or the part is at coordinate X, Y, Z. And so what comes out is just a few numbers instead of an entire image. So that was the distinction, I think, that the machine vision people were trying to make. Today, I think we would call this whole business of machine vision, we'd call that feature extraction. Here's an image and I want to extract some numerical features that describe or represent the objects that are in the scene. So machine vision is used for, it's often used in industrial inspection. You know, objects on a conveyor belt, and they go past a machine vision system to be inspected, pass or fail. They're used, the term is also used in tolling stations. They use a machine vision system to read the license plate on the car. So image comes in, it's processed, and what comes out are, you know, the 6, 7, 8 characters on the car's license plate. The next question is from Jordan Gleason, and I might make this the last question. It's fantastic to see all these questions coming in, but we're running out of time, and I'm getting hoarse. So let's make this the last one. So Jordan asked what I think about the state of the robotics industry in Australia. So I'm assuming Jordan's a native. Do I think that there are enough jobs to sustain all of the mechatronics and robotics students that the universities are now producing? It's a good question. From what we know about graduate outcomes, that is where our students are going, students with mechatronics skills are in good demand. If you consider almost all of the sort of modern systems that we create, they are mechatronic systems. A modern motor car is, an amazing fusion of computers. I hear people tell me there are up to 10 computers in a modern motor car. There are local area networks in there. There are traditional components like engines and brakes, a lot of electronics, and an awful lot of software. Tens of millions of lines of software in a modern motor car. And mechatronics students, I think, are well placed to comprehend systems that have got components that are mechanical, electronic, and computing software. And I think when you go to work in industry, generally you're always going to be working in a team with a bunch of other people. So you go out and you work as a mechatronic/robotics engineer, you've got some good understanding of these three fundamental components. You're in a team. There might be mechanical engineering specialists within your team. There might be electronic specialists, software specialists within your team. As a mechatronic engineer, you've got the advantage that you can actually have conversations with these people because you know enough about what they do. And in the tricky areas where you've got where electronics meets the mechanism, or where the computer meets the electronics, I think you have a very profound advantage. So I think the numbers of mechatronic and robotic students that we produce, I don't think is at all inconsistent with the demand in industry today. And it's my total belief that the robotics industry is going to grow, and it's going to grow very rapidly. Silicon Valley now, all the excitement is around robotics. So a lot of the hottest startups now are robotics companies. And these companies are going to need to be recruiting people who understand the principles of robotics. They're going to understand about mechanisms, about software, a bit of control theory, and I believe that they're going to need to understand a lot about the sensory side of robotics. They're going to need to know about laser rangefinders, and absolutely they should know about cameras. So I might bring the discussion to a conclusion. We'll do another one of these. It won't be next week because I'm on holiday next week, but perhaps the week after that. And I'll talk with the folk here and see if we can't actually take it down to the lab, actually show you some things firsthand. We should be able to do that. We'll hold on to all the questions that are posted today that we haven't gotten to. We'll add those to any questions that come in between now and when we hold the next event. So thanks very much for attending this event. I hope it's been interesting to you. Enjoy the coursework. Please be active in the discussion forums. Post good questions. If you can help other students, please help them out. Be polite and respectful in all your answers. I ask that of you. Enjoy the course and look forward to talking to you in the next event. Thanks very much. Bye.